Well, today we have a little surprise. Wow, Kim and David Padrick are with us. And now, who is that Aviva? Oh, Aviv. Ooh, sorry. Okay. See, don't even try. All right. But anyway, great to have you. Kim and David are from Devar Emet Messianic Synagogue in Skokie, Illinois, and traveling evidently. Long before we had Jared as an intern, Kim was an intern for a summer here at Beth Messiah a number of years ago. We remember it well. It was really a great time for us. I remember that youth choir and all that. It was wonderful. So it's great to see you. Great to have you. And how wonderful that you stopped by to spend some time with us today. So great to see you. All right. Well, today we are going to continue our study of Matthew. And we are in the second chapter here. Okay, so I'm doing like 5 things here. And hopefully actually communicating the word will also be part of that. Okay. All right. So we are in the second chapter, as I said. And so far, what we have seen, of course, is how Matthew ties Yeshua to the story of Israel. Yeshua is the Davidic king, and as we know, that is really the theme of Matthew. And we have seen this through the genealogy, the nature of his birth, the place of his birth, and tying, most importantly, tying all of it to the Tanakh. Clearly, by reading the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, we see that Yeshua is part and parcel of the story of Israel. And not only that, but very specifically and very intentionally, because everything is intentional. Very important. Matthew is bringing out certain things. And so the genealogy is very intentional. How he does it, how he takes it right from First Chronicles, most of it from First Chronicles, but then adds very specific names to it. And we've looked at that. And the combination of taking this genealogy from Chronicles and adding specific names shows us, one of the things that Matthew is showing us is that Yeshua is the next installment in the genealogy of kings. And not only a king, he is the king. Again, we see that also in the nature of his birth, the virgin birth, and quoting Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14. And then in chapter 2, last week we looked at the story of the Magi, and interestingly, the reference to King of the Jews by non-Jewish people, which is very interesting. And we said last week, we see that at the beginning and at the end of of this book of Matthew. And then, of course, it is the fact that he is born in Bethlehem, And we looked at how Matthew takes the words of this prophecy and uses a part of it, and then adds, so interestingly, another part from 2 Samuel chapter 5, when David is anointed for the third time king over all of Israel. Matthew actually takes a quote from 2 Samuel 5:2, where we read, "Who will shepherd my people Israel?" That is a quote from there. And so what we're doing is, on our Tuesday night and Wednesday morning Chavurah groups, we're looking more extensively at these passages in the Tanakh, and sort of getting a little bit more out of it. So very helpful. And so now, we talked also about Herod last week, and the story of Herod, and and his great insecurities and his habit of killing anyone who he just mildly even thinks might be working behind his back to usurp his kingdom. He, has had a terrible reputation. We also looked, though, that at the some of the great things he did in Jerusalem, which is very, very interesting, including the Western Wall as we know it. Anyway, and then we talked about how the Magi were afraid of Herod, and so they secretly left. So now we come to the next important installment in the young life of Yeshua and the significance of the young life of Yeshua. We come to... no, this isn't going to work. Okay, there we go. Okay, all right. And so for the sake of us all, here we have in chapter 2, in verses 13 and 14 and 15. Now when they had gone, this is the Magi, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Wow. Joseph is receiving on several different occasions messages, revelation from God about what he needs to do. He plays such a dramatically important role in the preservation of the life of Yeshua. And one of the things I hope that we get out of this is the importance of Joseph in the young life of Yeshua. So anyway, so again, now when they had gone, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is going to search for the child to destroy him." And so we see that Yeshua's life is in danger, right? Now, then we see, so Joseph got up and took the child and his mother while it was still night and left for Egypt. He remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." And so, Egypt plays such an interesting role in the life of the Jewish people. We always think of Egypt as the place of slavery, but actually, Egypt was a place where many Jewish people lived. There was quite a Jewish population. It was a province of the Roman Empire. Okay, it wasn't Israel. It wasn't Judea. But there were many Jews who lived there, especially in Alexandria. The Septuagint was written in Egypt. We actually read later on in the scriptures, it's not really part of our message, but the redemption of Egypt. Later on in history, we know Jeremiah, right, made his way down to Egypt to save his life. So it's very interesting here that Egypt here is a place where Yeshua's life is preserved. And this is very similar, of course, to the history of the Jewish people, the preservation of Jewish life. Now, it is interesting that Matthew uses this passage from Hosea, chapter 11. In verse 1 here. Out of Egypt I called my son. This is not a messianic prophecy. God is not calling Yeshua as if he was born in Egypt, calling him to come out of Egypt And so the question then is, so why does he use this passage, out of Egypt, I called my son? There are two important parts of this statement in Hosea chapter 11. There's two parts. One is out of Egypt, right? Out of Egypt. Out of Egypt is a statement that reminds us, and this is what the context of Hosea chapter 11 is. God is reminding the people that he redeemed them out of Egypt. And so the phrase, out of Egypt, and being identified with Yeshua, has to do with sort of the beginning of seeing a new exodus, a new redemption out of Egypt that's going to have to do with Yeshua. And we'll talk more about that. But then it says, I called my son. I called my son. Now, in Hosea chapter 11, Israel, the Jewish people, is the son. And the point of Hosea chapter 11 is God's unfailing love for the people. He's reminding them. Remember, Hosea lived long after the Exodus, right? And so he's reminding them that, look, you're breaking my heart, right? Look what I did for you. I brought you out of Egypt. And then later on in the chapter, how can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I give you up? And then he talks about another redemption, a redemption to come. And so the context is to be reminded of God's unfailing love for Israel. Okay? Now, all the way back in Exodus chapter 4, we see that in the story of the Exodus, Israel is called the son, right? Israel is my son, my firstborn. And so what Matthew is saying here is, one, that Yeshua is the embodiment of Israel. Not a replacement of the people of Israel, but he is the embodiment of Israel. Israel is the son. Israel was preserved. Yeshua is the son. Yeshua is preserved. God is protecting and preserving the Messiah. Hosea is reminding the people that God brought them out of Egypt, and he still loves them. Matthew identifies Yeshua as the embodiment of Israel. God loves him and spares him in order to fulfill the calling of Israel. Israel came out of Egypt in order to get to Mount Sinai, in order to receive the Torah, in order to enter into this communal covenant relationship and to go to the land and long-term to be a witness to the nations and to be a light to the nations. And this is the beginning of Matthew identifying Yeshua in the calling of Israel. There's also something else here that we'll see in a little while in relationship to Moses, but we'll save that for another few verses down. Okay. I guess I will just say this right now about that, I suppose. So in Hosea 11:1, the Exodus provides a pattern of preservation for his son Israel from Pharaoh's wrath. From Matthew's point of view, the past event is recapitulated by God's loving preservation of Yeshua by Herod's wrath. And doesn't that, I'll just say, it reminds us of Moses. Remember? It wasn't Herod, it was Pharaoh who was killing all the baby boys. Right? And we see that Moses is spared. And so we see this relationship of Yeshua to Moses and to Israel. This divine protection. Okay? So we need to talk a little bit about this idea of Yeshua embodying the calling and mission of Israel, because this becomes really a very important, this is weaved all the way through the Gospel of Matthew. A new Exodus, a second Moses, and so on. Okay? Now, a lot of people will say this. A lot of people teach this. But usually what they infer by teaching this is that what's jettisoned is the Jewish people. And that it is simply the church that becomes related to Yeshua. And so there's a replacement of the calling. The Jewish people are just sort of out there. It reminds me, we use this word jettison. You know what it reminds me of when a rocket goes up in space, right? And either in the atmosphere, the boosters, kind of like what you were saying, Henry, actually, now that I think about it, like a utility company, right? That it gets us there. Right? And so you see the boosters are jettisoned, but sometimes it's actually up in space and they're just floating around just forever. And you get the idea that, the Jewish people got us to Yeshua. Now that we have Yeshua, as we say in some corners of the world, adios. Right? But that is not the case. And we're going to look at a few passages here to make this point in the Tanakh, as well as in the Brit Hadashah. Okay, so I will say that yes, Yeshua is the embodiment of Israel. He is the Son. He is the servant. He is the light of the world. And all those things that Israel is called to be. But it does not mean that that's the end of the road for Israel, not in the least. But what we can say is that for Jewish people and all who come under the kingship of God, but primarily in these passages anyway, for Jewish people to be whom God called us to be, we must be connected to Yeshua. That if we are going to fulfill our calling as Israel, being a witness to the nations, a light to the world, spiritual leaders that God has called us to be, when you read Exodus, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, we have to be connected to the Messiah. And that is why it has always been the remnant of Israel who is fulfilling this calling. And that's why, frankly, we play such a dramatic role, even though nobody gets it, but us and others that we know, that we need to be inside of the community. We need to be inside of the Jewish community in order for the Jewish community to become, so to speak, attached to Yeshua, to fulfill this calling. But this is not something we're making up here. Isaiah does the same thing. Okay? This is really quite interesting. I don't know if we've thought about it. In Isaiah chapter 42, right, we are introduced to the servant, right? The Messiah, who becomes known as the suffering servant. But we read here, "Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him, and he will bring forth justice to the nations." Clearly, this is the Messiah. Okay? In Isaiah chapter 52, "Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted." I'm not quoting every single one, just a few of them. Okay? Isaiah 53:11, "As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, and he will bear their iniquities." right? And so when you read these passages, it is clear that the servant is an individual. That the servant is someone from within Israel who is called upon to be the servant of the Lord who's going to bring redemption. But in Isaiah chapter 43 and verse 10, and again, there's lots of them, okay? There are lots of these passages. In between, from Isaiah 42 through 53, there's a number of places, but we're just making the point here, okay? So we read here in Isaiah 43:10, "You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, so that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God was formed, and there will be none after me. Look, here Israel is the servant." Here, in the same set of chapters, you have the individual servant, you have Israel as the servant. You got to read the context. Location, 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 right? Isaiah chapter 44 and verse 1. "But now listen, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen." Okay? So, and we could read chapter 45 of Isaiah also. We could read chapter 48 of Isaiah. We could read chapter 49 where we actually see both. So it's all over. But the point is that, so Israel is the servant. Within Israel is evidently, in the context of the Tanakh, of the prophet Isaiah, within the servant Israel is the servant Israel. And the servant Israel redeems, as it says later on in Isaiah 42, "my blind servant Israel," who redeems the servant nation Israel from within. Okay? And that is what Matthew is bringing out. Israel is the son, but here now has come the one who is the son. Later, we will see the servant in the same, the use of servant in the same way. But there's more. There's more. In Isaiah chapter 5, if you're familiar with it, it's a very interesting, it's a short chapter. And it's actually a parable. So, a parable in the prophets? How could this be? As is the title of a book, they also taught in parables. Anyway, but it's actually speaking about rabbinic literature, but it's true of the prophets too. Anyway, so in Isaiah chapter 5, if you read the whole chapter, you will see it's about Israel being a vineyard. Israel, God owns the vineyard, and Israel is the vineyard, and it's all overgrown. It looks like if I had a vineyard, that's what it probably look like. You know what I mean? It would be all overgrown and not producing. And so then we read, "And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard." Okay, the vineyard's not doing hot here, right? Okay, well, isn't this interesting? Here's a passage that we usually don't think is related to this, but indeed it is. What did John say in the famous John 15 passage? "I am the true vine. My Father is the vine dresser." Isn't that interesting? He doesn't say he's the vine dresser. He is part of the vineyard. Yeshua is part of the vineyard. Part of this vineyard that's all messed up, right? But he has come to reclaim the vineyard. He's the servant who's come to reclaim the servanthood of Israel. And the sonship of Israel, for that matter. Right? "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit." And so the point is that Yeshua is preserving the calling and the mission of the people of Israel, not destroying it, not replacing it, not taking it away. And in other times, in other messages, we have talked about, for example, in Mark chapter 12, I'm only going to mention it. In Mark chapter 12, when Yeshua is telling the story of the vineyard and how he sent the prophets and then his son and they killed his son, and then he says that he's going to give it to someone else. He doesn't mean the church, okay? He doesn't mean the church as like this ecclesial entity. you know, he is referring to the remnant of Israel and all who come under the kingship of God. And so this is what Matthew is bringing out here. And because it's the beginning of Yeshua's life, and it is the beginning of the gospel, this is, in a way, it's all by way of introduction of what's coming, You know, we're also going to see this when we get to chapter, when we get to the next chapter, which is about the wilderness, right? That Yeshua in the wilderness is again the quintessential Israel in the wilderness. And this identification, again, of being the ultimate Jewish person. So it's like when we think about Yeshua, we can say, wow, he's like the greatest Jewish person that ever lived. Right? That's a way to think about him, not as just this other. And remember what I say when we talk about things like this. We believe in Yeshua not in spite of being Jewish, but because we are Jewish. It's not like Yeshua is not a hurdle, only culturally, and the way he has been portrayed. As we have all those famous pictures, and I always like to refer to the Nebraska man, with the little flip. That is the most non-Jewish looking traditional picture of Yeshua, but every culture has one. In fact, I have a Life magazine article about how Yeshua has been portrayed in art through the centuries, and I really need to dig that out and show it to everyone, because he's every color under the sun. He's but there's no Jewish one in the whole article. So something is really missing there. So that's why we need Yeshua as Jewish people. We need Yeshua. And that is what Matthew is bringing out. In order to fulfill this calling, we indeed need the Messiah. Okay. And so now let's go on here. Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. How horrific is that? What an atrocity! What a horrible thing is taking place here, right? Then what had been spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refused to be comforted because they were no more. This is not a prophecy. Jeremiah wasn't thinking about Yeshua here, but it is a verse that epitomizes the sadness that has come over the centuries and millennia to the Jewish people, whether it be simply persecution or whether it is chastisement from God. And haven't we said this after October 7th? Rachel still weeps. And continues to weep. So this verse, even in Jeremiah's day, by the way, in Jeremiah's day, Rachel was not weeping. Rachel was long gone. Rachel was dead for hundreds of years. But he says Rachel is weeping. So it's like a proverbial statement that he's making. It's not a messianic prophecy. It's a proverbial statement that could be used in any time period in Israel's history. And so Matthew writes about this, a terrible sadness. But what is interesting is that this comes from Jeremiah 31. Now, many of us, we think, if you've been around the block a while, right, we know that Jeremiah 31 is like, wow, that's a really great chapter. In fact, this is the only sad verse in the chapter. The next verse says, stop weeping. Stop weeping, better times are ahead, right? And what do we read? We read, there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. This is just a couple of verses later, right? Basically, the verse in between is that stop weeping because I'm better times are ahead. And then he says, there is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children will return to their own territory. And so it is a word of hope. Yes, for Matthew. Yes, this was a terrible thing. Yeshua is spared. By the way, one of the things that we see in this is that Yeshua is experiencing persecution. Joseph and Mary had to take him at night and run away to Egypt, right, to save his life. Hasn't this been the story of Jewish people in varieties of times and seasons and epochs? Yeshua is not killed. He's spared. He's a survivor of this terrible persecution. But he's part of the people of Israel, being called the Son, going down to Egypt and then coming out of Egypt. Identifies him really as part of the history of Israel and suffering persecution. And again, isn't this, again, by way of introduction, just the beginning of what's going to come? Okay. Now, but when Herod died, approximately the year 3, okay, in the Common Era. And so they would have been down there for more than a couple of weeks, right? We don't know how long, but it was for a period of time. But when Herod died, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph again. And isn't it interesting? He appears in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. He doesn't have to be in the land, right? And said, get up, says the same thing. He almost says the same thing in reverse. Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. If you look just a few verses up, is it go to the land of Egypt? Go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead. Okay. Back in Exodus, this should be Exodus. All right. In chapter 4, in verse 19. Oh, here it is. Oh, there it is. Okay. What can I tell you? I'm almost there. I almost made it. You know what I mean? Okay. Now the Lord said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who are seeking your life are dead. Isn't it interesting that it sounds very similar, like an echo, like when we're reading this in Matthew, it's like, hey, everybody, look back to Exodus. Because it says there, all that were seeking your life are dead. That is what the angel tells Joseph about Yeshua. All that are seeking his life are dead. And so you have this connection to Moses, of Moses being spared. Okay? We don't read too much here about Yeshua as a new Moses, as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses the teacher, Moses the deliverer, except when he does say earlier on in verse 15, I think it is, that out of Egypt, to fulfill out of Egypt, I will call my son. Just the phrase "out of Egypt" kind of reminds us of Moses and of Yeshua as a deliverer. Okay, so now here we are. No, there we're not. Okay, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so Joseph got up, took the child and his mother. By the way, I just find it interesting. I don't read too many people writing about this, but he keeps calling him the child. You know, he keeps calling him, not the baby, not baby Yeshua, okay, but the child. To me, that all goes back to the earlier part of Matthew at the end of chapter 1 and earlier in chapter 2 about the child being born of a virgin, the child being born in Bethlehem, that it is this child, the child who's the king, the child who is, again, born of a virgin, the child born in Bethlehem is the child who you are taking down to Egypt. And then, of course, as we have previously looked, a reminder of Isaiah chapter 9, right? A child will be born to us, the king with all of his designations, as we've looked at. So it's interesting that it says the child. So Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father, Herod, he was afraid to go there because Archelaus was just as bad as Herod. Herod was wicked, but Herod was like a pretty good politician. Archelaus was just a train wreck. And so, in fact, he is replaced soon after this time by who replaces Archelaus? He's real famous at the other end of the Gospel of Matthew. Oh, Pontius Pilate. Yes. Okay. And so Archelaus. In fact, they're not called kings, even though Herod was a client king. These are not a king. They're like overseers. There's different words that are used. But anyway, so Joseph says, "I don't want to go there." And so Antipas was in Galilee, another son of Herod, who was much better to have as the overseer. And so they decide to go to the Galilee. But also quite interesting, then it says, then after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the regions of Galilee. God has been guiding and directing Joseph to preserve the life of Yeshua, to preserve the life of Miriam. Right? And as we saw, he's not a bystander in this story. He's not a bystander. He is given the name, to name Yeshua. He, for all intents and purposes, is the father of Yeshua. No, not the biological father, and we explained that too, the importance of that. But he is the father and making decisions to protect his family. And by the way, if this was a nice little devotional, at a retreat or something, we could talk about Joseph as a role model of fatherhood, of protecting his family, doing what needs to be done, listening to the voice of God, and protecting his family and making right choices. He's a real hero in this, in these narratives. So they go to the Galilee. Now, we all know this, right? That Judea was the place to be. If you're going to be the Messianic king, Yeah, born in Bethlehem. That makes sense. But you need to be hanging around Jerusalem. After all, if you are the embodiment of Israel, if you are like the son, if you demonstrate that it's demonstrated that you are fulfilling the calling of Israel, the leader of Israel, even though unseen, unheralded, but the leader of Israel, you don't want to go to the Galilee. The Galilee was like, out in the sticks. It was not, did not have the gravitas. It was not viewed as, a place you want to be from, right? And what's interesting, not only do they go to Galilee, they could have gone, to Tiberias or Sepphoris, which were the two main cities. At least be from somewhere, But they came and lived in a city called Nazareth. Nazareth was a little speck. Nazareth had absolutely no meaning. Had absolutely no meaning. Almost like randomly, Now what's interesting is Luke leaves out things in Matthew, and Matthew leaves out things in Luke, right? Now, they're not, you put it all together and you get the whole story. Because what does it say in Luke? They were from Nazareth, right? And there was a census, and so they went down to Bethlehem. And that's where Yeshua is born. And so that they're returning, really, to Nazareth. But boy, once realizing who this child is, why do we want to go back there, right? Again, at least, okay, if we're afraid of Archelaus, okay, that I get. So let's go to Tiberias. It's a much nicer city. And so on. But they come to Nazareth. And then you have this statement. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. Okay. The first thing we want to notice is it doesn't say through the prophet or naming a prophet, right? It just says through the prophets. So it's not anything in particular. Okay, that's number one. Number two is there is absolutely no place in the Tanakh that ever comes close. No one's called a Nazarene, it's not like someone else is called the Nazarene, or Israel is called the Nazarene, and Yeshua embodies Nazarene. No. Okay? Now, there are different theories. Unfortunately, Matthew never exactly says what he means. And so there are several options. Okay? One is that kind of like, in the book of Judges, when Samson is born, he shall be called a Nazarite. Okay? And so the Greek word, which is pronounced in English Nazareth or Nazarene, sounds kind of like Nazarite. Okay, it sounds kind of that way. All right, but the question is Matthew saying something about Samson here? I don't think so. And so some hold that because the Nazarite vow, godliness, separation, belonging to God, and all of that. Okay, you don't lose your eternal destiny over this. Okay, okay. Although some might disagree. All right. Then there's this one. This is more popular. Then a shoot will spring from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from his roots will bear fruit. Branch is the word netzer. Netzer. Okay? Like the school, Netzer David, right? In Florida. You can tell, John, that I said that. Thank you. All right. And a branch from his roots will bear fruit. In other words, he shall be called one who is descended from David. That could be. But it's kind of obscure. I mean, just the sound of the word. To me, I don't know, just the sound of the word sounds like a Hebrew word, and so it's a play on words, and maybe that's what it is. That could be. A lot of people hold that view. But you know what? I think, see, I'm like all those guys. First say all the ones that you don't think is the right one. Right? So I would suggest, and I'm not the only one certainly, but one that I think is more plausible, because there is in the Brit Chadashah a testimony about what it means to be called a Nazarene. It was not a good thing. Nathanael, in whom there was no guile, remember, says to him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Right? So Philip said to him, "Come and see." But the point is, this was the reputation. This was the reputation of Nazareth. This was the reputation of someone called a Nazarene. And I would suggest that what Matthew is getting at, perhaps, is that he is unheralded, that he is misunderstood, that he is lowly, that he is humble. And you do read in Zechariah chapter 9, you read about that. All over Isaiah 53, we read about that. Also parts of Isaiah 50, 51. We read, I think it's, anyway. We read about that. And Yeshua was indeed misunderstood. Right? When you read the beginning of Isaiah, I'm actually going to have to open the book. Okay, I'm sorry to go back to the 20th century for a second here. But in Isaiah 53, when it says here, "For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty, that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him." A Nazarene. A Nazarene. And so, very possibly, that could be what Matthew is getting at. In any case, wouldn't we say that when we were talking earlier about having to go down to Egypt, being persecuted, and so on? And so, in these three places where Matthew quotes the Tanakh, they're not messianic prophecies, but what they are cumulatively the promise of one to come, a son to come, a king to come, the one who will be, as it were, another Moses, bringing a second Exodus, and the one who is indeed the Messianic king. And so may we recognize or feel validated in that, yes, indeed, Yeshua is indeed the Messiah, and that when we are connected to him, we are connected to the calling and purpose of the chosen people. That there is meaning and purpose in life as we are connected to the Messiah. We are the servant of the Lord. That is why, what did Yeshua say to his disciples, like just about the very last thing that he says to them in Acts chapter 1? Be my witnesses. Be my witnesses. Fulfill the calling from which I called you way back when. But you have to wait in Jerusalem for the pouring out of the Ruach HaKodesh. Because the pouring out of the Ruach HaKodesh will empower you to be the men and women that God called you to be. And so may we recognize that calling in our own lives, not only individually, but communally as well. May we realize that knowing the Lord is not about just feeling good about what's going to happen to me when I die, and not about, making me a better me, or anything like that. But it's that now we are part and parcel of the purpose of God in this world. And why was Israel called to be God's witnesses? Was it just we need more? Our numbers are down, and we need more, Jews, God-fearers, believers. No, it is for the transformation of this world. And that is what God has called us to. That is why Yeshua came into this world, and that is why he continues. He continues to minister to us, and that is the hope, indeed, that we have for the future. So even if Rachel weeps today, it's not the end of the story. There is a future, and there is a hope. Let's pray. Lord God, I pray, God, that we might be encouraged to see all of this in your plan. Lord, thank you that what we see here in the beginning of Matthew is the future of Israel's story, is the future of the Jewish people, is the one who, by means of his death and resurrection and ascension and pouring out of the Spirit, gives us hope in our calling. And Lord, we look forward to the day when Yeshua will certainly sit on his throne and untangle all the messes that we have gotten ourselves into. And that finally, Israel, the Jewish people, will indeed know the Messiah. They'll recognize him whom they have pierced, and they'll mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And Israel will finally, as a people, be the men and women whom you've called us to be. And Lord, just as we read in the book of Romans, now if their transgression be riches for the world and their failure be riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? How much greater will it be when all Israel is saved? It'll be a blessing on this world, the redemption indeed of the world. And so let us keep moving forward. Let us have our eyes on Messiah Yeshua. God, may you keep us on that right track, Lord. And may we indeed be a restored vineyard in the vine. And we pray in Messiah's name. Amen.
Amen.